They thought they were just fixing a dirt road, but what they actually did was build a six-figure mistake on my land and hand me the paperwork to prove it. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life, I never thought a piece of property would become the center of a battle between me and an entire neighborhood. I inherited 9 acres of farmland outside Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, from my grandfather, a man who spent 50 years waking up before sunrise, working that soil and taking care of every inch like it was a member of the family. He used to tell me, "Land remembers everything, Ethan, the people who respect it and the people who don't." I didn't fully understand what he meant back then, but a few years later, I would learn exactly how right he was. The problem started when a luxury development called Willow Creek Estates was built right beside my property. 24 homes went up almost overnight. Big houses, perfect lawns, expensive cars, the kind of neighborhood where every mailbox looked identical and every rule came in a thick booklet. At first, I had no problem with them. In fact, I helped them. Their only practical route to the highway added almost 40 minutes to their commute. So when their developer approached me about using a small access road that crossed part of my land, I agreed. We signed an easement agreement. It was simple. They could use the road, maintain it, and everyone benefited. I wasn't trying to make enemies. I just wanted neighbors who understood that cooperation worked both ways. For almost a year, everything was fine. Then Marcus Hale moved into Willow Creek. Marcus was an architect from the city, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately looked for something that needed changing. Within months, he became president of the Homeowners Association. I remember the first time he came to my property. He stood there in his expensive jacket, looking down at my gravel road like he had discovered a personal insult. He said, "Ethan, this entrance doesn't exactly represent the standard of the community." I laughed because I honestly thought he was joking. I said, "It's a farm road, Marcus. It wasn't built to impress anyone. It was built to get people where they need to go." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they've already decided they're right. "Things change," he said. "The neighborhood has expectations now." I should have paid more attention to that sentence, because 2 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery outside my window. At first, I thought maybe someone was working on the county road. Then I looked out and saw dump trucks, excavators, and workers spreading fresh asphalt directly across the access road that crossed my property. I drove out there and my stomach dropped. They weren't repairing the road. They were completely redesigning it. They widened it, removed sections of the old gravel path, cut into the edges of the land, and then I saw something that made me forget everything else around me. One of the machines was pulling out the old stone markers that had been there for generations. Those stones weren't decorations. They were the original boundary markers my grandfather showed me when I was a kid. He would walk me along the property line and explain how those stones had been placed there long before any of the houses next door existed. I walked toward the operator and yelled, "Stop, right now." "Who authorized this?" A worker pointed toward Marcus standing near his truck. Marcus didn't look surprised at all. He walked over calmly and said, "Relax, Ethan. We're improving things." I looked at the broken stones sitting in the dirt and couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You removed my boundary markers and you're calling that improvement?" He shrugged. "Those were outdated. The neighborhood needs proper infrastructure." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a road. It was about control. Marcus didn't see my property as someone else's land. He saw it as unfinished space waiting for him to manage. 3 days later, I received a letter from the HOA congratulating me on the community improvement project. Buried near the bottom was a new set of restrictions. Farm equipment would be limited during certain hours. Large vehicles would need approval. Basically, they'd used my land, changed my property, and then decided they had the authority to tell me how I could use it. I sat at my kitchen table that night staring at that letter for almost an hour. I wasn't angry at first. I was disappointed. My grandfather spent his entire life believing neighbors could solve problems without turning everything into a fight. But Marcus had made one mistake. He assumed I was just a farmer who wouldn't know how to fight back. He didn't know that, before I managed farmland, I was a civil engineer. He didn't know I understood surveys, property lines, drainage plans, and construction records better than most people. And he definitely didn't know that old county records were about to reveal something that would completely change the balance of power. The next morning, I drove to the county archives and started looking for documents that had been sitting untouched for decades. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for the truth. And what I found inside those old records would turn a neighborhood improvement project into the most expensive mistake Willow Creek Estates had ever made. I spent the next several hours inside the county records office surrounded by dusty folders, old maps, and documents that most people would never bother looking at. To be honest, I didn't even know what I expected to find. Part of me hoped there was some simple explanation, some misunderstanding that would allow everyone to move on without turning neighbors into enemies. But the deeper I went, the more obvious it became that Marcus Hale and the Willow Creek HOA had made a very expensive assumption. They assumed because the road had always been there, they somehow owned the right to change it. They assumed because their neighborhood was newer and more expensive, their plans mattered more than my family's history. But property lines don't care about opinions. They don't care about million-dollar houses or fancy neighborhood signs. They only care about what is written on paper. After hours of searching, I found the original survey documents connected to my grandfather's property, including records dating back over a century. I spread the old maps across the table and started comparing them with the new development plans. Then I saw it. The access road wasn't where Marcus thought it was. The line had been measured incorrectly when Willow Creek was developed. The road they had widened, paved, and redesigned didn't sit on their property. It wasn't a shared community road. It wasn't some forgotten strip of land between properties. Almost the entire improved section was located on my side of the boundary. The same road they had spent thousands of dollars upgrading was sitting on land that belonged to me. I remember leaning back in that chair and just staring at the documents. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't even anger. It was disbelief. Because suddenly every conversation I had with Marcus made sense. He wasn't fixing something that belonged to the community. He was making changes to something he didn't own. I hired a licensed surveyor the next day. I wanted everything confirmed by someone independent because I knew what would happen next. Nobody believes a person when they say, "Actually, the land is mine." They believe official measurements. They believe stamped documents. They believe facts. The survey crew spent 2 days marking the actual property boundaries. When they finished, the results matched the old records perfectly. The road was mine. The construction was unauthorized. The boundary stones had been removed from their original location without permission. I didn't call Marcus immediately. I waited. I wanted to make sure every detail was correct before I made my next move. Then, 72 hours after the survey was completed, I installed a 12-foot steel gate across the access road. I placed clear private property signs on both sides. I added a heavy chain and lock, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I wanted to make something very clear. Ownership still meant something. The next morning, Willow Creek woke up to a problem nobody expected. Their shortcut to the highway was closed. Cars lined up. People were confused. Some homeowners thought it was a mistake. Others thought the county had done something. Then Marcus arrived. I was standing near the gate when his SUV pulled up. He stepped out, walked toward me, and for the first time since I met him, he didn't look confident. He looked confused. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he asked. I handed him a folder. "Protecting my property." He opened it and immediately saw the survey. His expression changed. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but his voice wasn't as strong as before. I pointed to the boundary lines. "It proves enough." Marcus took out his phone and said, "You realize the HOA can take legal action, right?" I nodded. "You should probably talk to your attorney." I already talked to mine. That was the first time I saw him realize this wasn't a conversation he could control. Later that afternoon, the HOA lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter claiming I was interfering with community access. My response was simple. I sent them the survey, the original property documents, photos of the removed boundary markers, and an invoice for the unauthorized construction work that had been performed on my land. The amount was $18,000. That number wasn't random. It represented the cost of repairs and corrections needed because of changes they made without permission. For a few days, things went quiet. I thought maybe they were finally accepting reality. I was wrong, because the biggest problem wasn't the gate. It wasn't the lawsuit threats. It wasn't even the road. The biggest problem was something nobody noticed when they were pouring asphalt. When Marcus ordered the road widened, his crew changed the natural slope of the land. They altered the drainage pattern that had existed for decades. And when you change how water moves across farmland, eventually that water finds a new place to go. Unfortunately for Willow Creek, the new place was directly toward their own neighborhood. I noticed the issue when I inspected the construction area after a heavy rainfall. The runoff wasn't moving the way it used to. Water that once flowed safely along the original path was now being redirected toward the northern section of the development. I contacted an engineering firm and asked them to conduct a full assessment. Their report came back with exactly what I suspected. The road modifications had changed the drainage system. The construction was performed without proper review, and the risk wasn't theoretical. It was already happening. A few weeks later, a major storm moved through the area. I remember standing on my porch watching the rain come down and thinking about how quickly one bad decision can create consequences nobody planned for. The next morning, my phone started ringing. At first, I ignored it. Then I saw the messages. Multiple homeowners in Willow Creek had water damage. 2 garages had flooded. One property had serious foundation issues. Another homeowner reported that their house had shifted enough that doors and windows were no longer closing correctly. The neighborhood that had spent months talking about improving appearances suddenly had a much bigger problem. They had built a beautiful entrance, but underneath that entrance was a mistake waiting for the right storm, and now everyone wanted answers. The insurance companies arrived. Inspectors looked at the damage. Engineers reviewed the construction records. Then came the news that changed everything. The claims were being denied. The reason was simple. The damage was connected to unauthorized construction performed on private property without proper approval. Suddenly, the homeowners who had supported Marcus started asking different questions. They weren't asking how to make the neighborhood look better anymore. They were asking why their HOA president had approved a project that created $180,000 in damage. And for the first time, Marcus Hale wasn't the person with all the answers. He was the person everyone wanted answers from. The next HOA meeting was unlike anything I had ever seen. I had been to plenty of community meetings before, usually the boring kind where people argued about parking spaces, mailbox colors, or whether a fence needed a different shade of paint. But this time, nobody cared about appearances. Nobody cared about perfectly trimmed lawns or neighborhood standards. Everyone in that room wanted one thing: answers. 24 homeowners sat there looking exhausted, frustrated, and honestly embarrassed. The same people who had once trusted Marcus Hale because he sounded confident and professional were now realizing confidence and competence are 2 very different things. Marcus was sitting at the front of the room, but he looked completely different from the man who had stood on my property weeks earlier, pointing at my gravel road and telling me what needed to change. Back then, he carried himself like he was the smartest person in every conversation. Now, he was staring at a stack of engineering reports, insurance letters, and angry questions from the very people he claimed to represent. One homeowner stood up and said, "Marcus, you told us this project was approved. You told us it was safe. You told us this would improve our property values. So how are we now responsible for repairs that cost almost $200,000? Marcus tried to explain. He talked about intentions, about improving the community, about how nobody could have predicted the storm. But the homeowners weren't listening anymore. Because intentions don't repair cracked foundations. Good ideas don't replace damaged homes. And a confident speech doesn't change what the documents say. The engineering report was clear. The road modifications changed the drainage pattern. The construction was done without proper authorization. And the consequences landed on the people who trusted the wrong person. I watched everything quietly from the back of the room. Some people probably expected me to enjoy that moment. Maybe they thought I would sit there smiling because the man who caused me problems was finally facing consequences. But honestly, I didn't feel that way. Seeing families stressed about their homes wasn't satisfying. I never wanted anyone to lose sleep over this. I never wanted a neighborhood war. All I wanted from the beginning was for someone to respect the property my family had protected for generations. The funny thing about situations like this is that people often think the fight is about money or power, but most of the time, it's about respect. Marcus could have walked onto my property and asked. We could have talked. We could have reviewed the road together. Maybe we could have found a solution everyone liked. Instead, he made a decision because he believed he had the authority to do it, and that one decision changed everything. Within days, homeowners began signing a petition demanding changes in HOA leadership. Some wanted Marcus removed immediately. Others discussed legal action if evidence showed he ignored proper procedures. The same neighborhood that once followed his instructions without question was now questioning every decision he had ever made. His biggest mistake wasn't that he built the road. His biggest mistake was believing nobody would challenge him. A few days later, Marcus came back to my property. This time, there was no company truck, no lawyer standing beside him, no confident speech prepared, just him. He parked near the gate and walked toward me slowly. For a few seconds, we just stood there looking at the road between us, the same road that started this entire mess. Finally, he said, "Ethan, we need to figure something out." I looked at him and said, "I thought we already figured something out. You built on land that wasn't yours." He looked down for a moment. Then he said something I never expected to hear from him. "What will it take to make this disappear?" That sentence told me everything. Marcus finally understood that this wasn't a disagreement between neighbors anymore. It was a legal problem created by choices he made. I had spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to do next. I could have refused any agreement. I could have kept the gate locked and forced the entire neighborhood to find another route. I could have taken the HOA to court and let attorneys fight for years. And part of me wanted to. After everything that happened, after seeing those old boundary stones destroyed, after hearing him talk down to me like my family's land was just empty space waiting for development, I had every reason to be angry. But anger is a terrible decision maker. I remembered my grandfather's advice. He always said, "Protect what is yours, but don't let anger decide what you do with it." So I chose a different path. I told Marcus there were terms, not revenge, not punishment, just reality. The first condition was that the HOA would immediately cover the $180,000 in repair costs caused by the construction changes. The homeowners didn't create this problem, but the organization responsible needed to fix it. The second condition was that the access road would officially be recognized as my property. No confusion, no assumptions, no future HOA president deciding they could redesign it again. The third condition was an easement agreement with a monthly payment of $5,000 for the next 40 years. If they wanted to continue using my land as their shortcut, they would pay for that privilege. And the final condition was the one Marcus hated most. The agreement could not simply be canceled later because someone new took over the HOA and decided they didn't like the deal. It was designed to prevent the exact thing that caused the problem in the first place. Someone assuming they had control over something they didn't own. Marcus read through the agreement slowly. He stopped several times. He looked frustrated, but he also knew the situation. There was no bluff left. The documents were clear. The survey was clear. The damage reports were clear. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You really thought this through?" I shook my head. "No, Marcus. I just did what should have been done before anyone touched that road." I checked the facts. He didn't respond. 6 hours later, the agreement was signed. The repair payment was processed the following day. The gate opened again. The neighborhood had access. The homeowners had a solution. And Marcus walked away knowing the road he wanted to control was the same road that reminded everyone he never owned it. Years later, people still ask me if I felt like I won. Honestly, I don't think of it as winning. A win would have been avoiding the entire situation. A win would have been keeping the relationship with my neighbors peaceful from the start. What happened instead was a lesson. A lesson that property rights matter. A lesson that paperwork matters. And maybe most importantly, a lesson that treating people like they don't matter usually comes back around. The 12-foot steel gate is still there today. It stays open. The chain hangs on the side. Not because I want to intimidate anyone, but because sometimes a simple reminder is enough. A reminder that every road has an owner. Every boundary has a history. And every person deserves to be respected before problems become battles. Marcus eventually stepped down from the HOA. From what I heard, Willow Creek became a different kind of neighborhood afterward. Less focused on controlling every detail. More focused on actually communicating. Maybe that was the real improvement they needed all along. Not a wider road. Not fresh pavement. Not a more impressive entrance. Just people learning that cooperation works better than entitlement. Because in the end, they thought they were upgrading my property. They thought they were making my old farm fit their vision. But they ended up creating the most expensive shortcut in the neighborhood. A road they built, a road they damaged themselves with, and a road they now pay to use. So now I'm curious what you would have done if you were standing in my shoes. Would you have locked the gate and taken the fight all the way to court? Would you have accepted a settlement? Or would you have tried to rebuild the relationship from the beginning? Was this fair justice? Or did everyone pay for one person's mistake? Let me know your thoughts in the comments because these property battles always reveal how differently people see fairness. And if you enjoy stories about unexpected legal twists, neighborhood conflicts, and ordinary people standing up when someone crosses the line, make sure you subscribe. There are plenty more stories coming where patience, preparation, and the truth end up being the strongest tools anyone can have.